So the ACC, I would tell you, as long as things don't come totally off the rails with Florida State and Clemson and getting some sort of settlement now that the ESPN contract has been figured out, the ACC, I think, has secured its future for the next 5 years. Now, because of that, we're getting national media saying that they're in a much better spot than the Big 12, which didn't get to like Big 12, Pac-12 levels of rivalry and back and forth. But the Big 12 ACC conversation, the chatter, has been fairly heated over the last 18 months or so. So I know how this will land in Big 12 circles. People are not really going to like that very much. I do think it's a little bit lazy. I think it's a little bit lazy. And I will tell you why. But here is what I'm referring to. Pat Forty, who writes for Sports Illustrated, but I just listen to him on the Yahoo College Football Pod, College Football Inquirer, where I think he does do a very good job. But he wrote this in a big piece that was really focused on the ACC and its basketball conundrum right now. But he said, the SEC and Big Ten will continue to hog much of the available revenue, which is simply the law of the jungle. But the ACC and Big 12 are viable power conferences that should remain competitive across the board. And the ACC is the better positioned of those two. The ACC is the better positioned of those two conferences. The ACC put 2 teams in the expanded 12-team playoff this past season. It has put 4 teams in the last 3 men's Final Fours. It has placed 8 teams in the last 9 Final Fours of both the men's and women's tournaments. And it, get ready for this, it perennially populates the upper echelon of the Learfield Directors Cup standings for all sports programs. Well, you guys know, if you listened to the show the other day, that I'm just going to love that point, that we're bringing up the Learfield Directors Cup, which is given to the best overall athletic program in the country. So you're relying heavily on Olympic sports success to win the Learfield Directors Cup. Yeah, let's just start by throwing that out. Here in this discussion, we're going to have no talks about the Learfield Directors Cup. Congratulations, ACC, on landing Stanford. That'll help you in the Learfield Directors Cup. I don't care. It doesn't matter in any sort of realignment discussion. Now, I'm not trying to belittle or diminish those sports, but as it relates to the strength of a conference and how it relates to the conference realignment landscape, which is what we were talking about here, no effect. None whatsoever. Learfield Directors Cup, not going to have any effect there. I mean, look, if you don't believe me, just go start Googling Olympic sports, ACC, and Big Ten, because there have been plenty of articles written this year about how crazy it is, the schedules that those guys are all having to endure going across the country all the time. Mick Cronin, he's even men's basketball, but Mick Cronin, the head coach at UCLA, had a great rant about it. How it makes no sense for the student athlete, but they're doing it because conference realignment and money, and they have to. So no, don't get me started on Learfield Sports Directors Cup. This is all about football and a tiny sliver of basketball. Little bit of basketball in there, little tiny bit. Big 12 is trying to make it more than just a little tiny bit, hopefully, with splitting the 2 TV deals at one point. But for the most part, just a little tiny bit of basketball. Now, one thing I really hate from that statement from Pat Forty was his only comment about football, which again is the most important part of all of this. His only comment about football was, quote, it put 2 teams in the expanded playoff. And that was coming right after they're more well-positioned. They're in a better spot than the Big 12. Well, it's very convenient to just say, well, yeah, they put 2 teams in the expanded playoff. Big 12 only had 1. That sounds really nice, but it's missing the point, because I would tell you the Big 12 easily got the better of the 2 conferences in terms of what happened in the postseason this year. For one, if we're talking about money, it's a wash. It's a moot point. Yes, the ACC had 2 teams make it, but the Big 12 gets 2 of the credits, if you want to call them that, for having Arizona State make it and get a bye. So getting through that first round, you get the money. And then for playing in the second round, you get the money there. So ASU essentially made up like 2 shares of the money there, which would equal what Clemson and SMU did, because they both went down in their first game. They also both lost by double digits. SMU got completely whitewashed. Clemson had a decent showing, but still lost and did not play Texas nearly as close as Arizona State did, the one Big 12 team that was there, who, came within one play of getting the Big 12 even more money. But even in doing so and losing, earned the Big 12 a lot of respect and earned themselves a lot of respect. They had a far better performance than the ACC in the playoff, and it led to now people retroactively being like, hey, we probably should have paid more attention to BYU. And the fact that that was happening is evidence of the Big 12 having a much better postseason than the ACC. So let's establish that. If we're going to use last year as the barometer here, I mean, the Big 12 had the better postseason. And the postseason is the only way that you're really going to gain tangible currency in this world if you're not the SEC or the Big 10. Now, how will that play out over the next 5 years on the football field? If you want to argue the ACC is more well-positioned because they've got better brands, okay, fine. I will not dispute at all that they have better brands. They've got 3 better brands for sure. I guess 4 really. North Carolina, based largely on basketball brand, but they probably fit in there too. But Florida State, Clemson, Miami, they definitely have better brands. But if we're taking the last year, like the first year that we had this version of the Big 12 going up against this version of the ACC, what did the brand value do for you? Miami had a nice season. Miami did have a nice season, but even then they missed the playoff with a generational talent at quarterback. Florida State was a complete disaster. Florida State won 2 games this year. They finished dead last, 17th out of 17 teams in the ACC. They're going to have to pull themselves out of 2-win season hell here to get things moving forward again. Clemson won the league, but I think this year, as much as almost any, established that they're still like a good step and a half behind the real elite tier in college football. So, I get two of the 3 had good seasons, but it didn't equate to any kind of playoff or postseason success. And then one of the teams was a total disaster, and we'll see how they're going to be able to pull themselves out from that. So based on the evidence that we have of these conferences going head to head, like 1v1, I mean, I would tell you it's not a knockout or anything, but the Big 12 won more rounds than the ACC by just a little bit. But when it really counted, I'm going to tilt the scale toward the Big 12, actually. For this year 1 in football, while acknowledging the ACC has better brands and a better opportunity via those brands to bring in more talent that could give them a better opportunity to compete in the playoff. But hell, man, Arizona State was definitely out-talented against Texas, and we all saw what happened in that game. So the ACC's got to earn it if they're going to do that. Now, the hoops, I mentioned hoops is at least a little part of this. The whole crux of the article was like, well, the ACC's got a real basketball problem. I mean, that's trending toward being like a 4-bid league this year in the NCAA tournament. It's not good. Duke is the only team that looks like they've got a shot to make a deep run, whereas in the Big 12, it's a down year in the Big 12, and yet you would still say like Texas Tech, Arizona, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, all those teams, that's 5 teams I just rattled off there that would be in that same category as Duke that like have a chance to make a deep run, have a legitimate chance, I would say, whereas you got 1 in the ACC. And the problem is for the ACC now, like so many of their great coaches have retired. Roy Williams, this really is remarkable when you go through this list. Roy Williams, Coach K, Mike Bray at Notre Dame, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, Tony Bennett, Virginia, Jim Larinaga, Miami, Leonard Hamilton. And you're talking about 4 national champion coaches there between K, Roy Williams, Tony Bennett, Jim Boeheim. 4 national championship coaches, another Final Four coach in Larinaga. I don't know. Did Leonard Hamilton ever make a Final Four? Hamilton and Bray, pretty damn good in their own right. You're having to replace all that talent right now. So basketball, I mean, I'm definitely giving the edge to the Big 12 easily. It's just, how much does basketball actually matter? And then money, you got to be careful here, folks. Do not believe everything that you read on the internet because money, you can see some graphics out there floating around right now among ACC propagandist circles that were created by an old friend of anybody who's been following college football conference realignment. For, if you're an OG or that's been following it on the internet for, 3-4 years here, you certainly know what I'm talking about there. But don't believe the graphics that are showing that the ACC got $50 million in media payouts alone, that's what's coming in here. That is not even close to accurate. Their entire payout, like media and everything else from the conference, was $44.8 million for fiscal year 2023, and that is $600,000 per school more than the Big 12. That's it. They're basically dead even, Big 12 and ACC, in terms of fiscal year 2023 payout. If you're talking about like with success initiatives and brand initiatives, maybe a Florida State or a Miami or a Clemson could make $50 million per year in media payouts. If everything goes really well, now we may be talking. But that's not what the standard payout is between the two leagues right now. They're about as even as it could get in fiscal year 2023 in terms of what they're paying to their teams. It's a wash. So money a wash. Basketball, big advantage, Big 12. Football brands, big advantage, ACC. Tangible year one football success, Big 12 v. ACC. I'm going to go slight lean Big 12. So that's kind of the tail of the tape right now. I think it's a very nuanced discussion. I'm not naive. I know how much brands matter in college football. I know how much some of that prestige matters when you're trying to recruit a roster that could go win you a championship. I would say that the ACC brands give them an edge there in trying to do that, but they've got to prove it. So I think it's pretty close right now, man. I think it's pretty close. And I will punctuate this discussion with R Webb. Thank you, R Webb, for this reminder. R Webb says, John, anytime you see 40 talk about ACC sports, just remember his daughter is a Stanford swimmer. He has a strong ACC Stanford bias. Yes, that is fair. And it certainly explains some of the, well, hey, look, ACC's dominating the Learfield Directors Cup. They're way better than the Big 12 in the Learfield Directors Cup. It was a BYU fan that hit me up the other day and was like, what do you think about that? And I'm like, well, one, it's great because it's one of those nice things. You definitely like to have it if you can. But BYU is really the only athletic department in the league that can consistently compete in that. They're the only well-resourced across the board enough athletic program out there to do it. So BYU needs to carry that flag. It's just, I would say, I guess it's really fortunate for the Big 12. Fortunately for the Big 12, that doesn't really matter all that much when it comes to conference realignment, conference strength, general conference strength right now.